Hello, and welcome to another episode of Red Factories, the Battle for Stalingrad. We've got another shorter episode, at least, and the Germans are yet again on the offensive. As tends to be the norm, the longer a game in Advanced Squad Leader goes on, uh, you should see more and more just broken units start to pile up. Dead units obviously will always accompany that, but you generally will never have enough leaders to go around and help everybody come back, and it's tough enough as is to regain control of your units. Obviously, I say this when I self-rally 2 units successfully, but it won't always be the case. Now, I think there might have been an issue there because I forget if that leader would have been under a DM, and it's kind of why you should always have DM counters on every unit that it applies, rather than stacks in general, just to avoid this sort of thing. Similarly, you should usually filter your broken units down below units that are combat effective, just to not have any real issues. I'll probably notice it soon enough, but it's always handy also to remove the moved status. If I haven't already mentioned it, I typically remove the moved status after the advanced fire phase. It just helps when it comes to advances, so you know which specifically you have not done that for, or which units you haven't done that for. It's tough enough remembering all the separate units that you did move versus an accidental, happened to click on this unit and just moved them sideways a little bit. Sometimes the game will give them a move status, even though it's not supposed to be the case. And so far, yet again, not getting some terribly good results with my artillery. I should also point out that certain artillery units, or artillery support modules, or however you want to call them, in this campaign, won't have certain fire types. So, for example, the 80mm mortar should have the high explosive payload, we'll call it. But there are some modules that won't have, say, smoke as well, or may only have smoke and not high explosive. So it's definitely something to keep in mind because, well, we've seen, at least in a minimal example, that smoke has a very different interaction than high explosive, and especially if you say had a barrage, or even just a normal concentration, having that smoke in such a wide area can really turn the tide on eliminating, at least temporarily, a very serious choke point, because they won't be able to shoot out, and while you won't be able to shoot in, you can have that power of mobility over your opponent. Similarly, we probably won't see it for, I don't think in this first day, but there is also the capability, or maybe not capability specifically called, but there is also what's called encirclement, and you get that by firing in 2 different directions at the same target consecutively. So, for example, if I had a unit say, um, shoot at that hex that I just targeted, B12, from the current shooter's hex, but also if the next shot was from A13, which is on the complete opposite side, that would force an encirclement status on that now DM'd or broken unit. And encirclement might not sound like all that much. Just this name kind of implies like, okay, well they're surrounded, I guess, in a limited capacity. But it does affect their morale, or at least all their following actions. So specifically in the rules, let's see if I can fish this out. So a qualifying target location there is thereafter marked with an encirclement counter, and every non-berserk, non-heroic enemy or melee personnel unit therein suffers an immediate one-level drop in morale to both the attack that sealed its encirclement and any other attacks made against that location as long as it is so marked. All fire by an encircled unit is subject to a +1 DRM on the IFT, so infantry fire table, or 2-hit dice roll if it's ordnance. The movement factor cost of the first location entered, regardless of the phase, by an encircled unit is doubled after all modification. So basically what this means is if it's very useful to get encirclement on units, and I think it's something that the game itself, in many different respects, doesn't ever really mention to a new player. I haven't, in all of my games, really thought about encirclement, and I think that's kind of a shame, because the fact that you drop a unit's morale by 1 automatically on that shot that seals the encirclement means that you can toss a very weak shot, something that doesn't really have much of a chance of causing too much damage. It's only the fact that they're being shot at that really counts. When that second shot comes out and effectively does that great amount, like if your second shot is, say, like a 20 firepower versus the first one's 4, that 20 is going to do a lot more, provided it actually gets a good result. But even on a medium, even on a straight normal morale check, reducing or being able to reduce a leader, especially if it's a good, say, like 9 or a 10 morale leader, down to an 8 or a 9 respectively, that becomes really strong, because anything you can do to reduce the leader's morale is that much more powerful, because their modifier does not apply to them. So getting an extra number in, or one extra potential chance to effectively break or limit the ability of a leader is definitely something worth chancing. The fact that they then get a +1 DRM just makes it that much harder for them to fight back. And then the fact that they double any of their movement, which severely limits where they can go. We probably won't see it too much here. Moving into a building location, or from a building location to another, is 4 movement factors at that point, because it's 2 to move into a building. So being able to occupy an entire the move of an entire turn for that unit to being 4, that's pretty strong. And again, there's other cases where that could also be incredibly good. For example, if you happen to have a unit that's only real option is, say, to go uphill, they have to counter exhaust, or else they'll be in a lot of trouble. Speaking of a lot of trouble, though, this half squad just got really unlucky. The fact that the mortar got a critical hit just means that, barring some extreme circumstance, it's not really going to survive or do all that much. I think I mentioned it in a previous video. I don't believe I'm calculating it correctly when I'm using the critical hit status on this, because area of fire is halved, so I don't think it would have been. Um, I'm pretty sure the mortar would not have shot at 24 or whatever firepower is at. I think it should have been halved. But regardless, it's already played through from quite some time ago, so we'll just have to live with it. This is also one of those rare cases. I was I only made this shot really because it's a 6 firepower, and it's really nice to see that I was able to use the crew's inherent firepower. Usually, you don't get that sort of thing. Getting the rate of fire was also pretty nice. Well, getting it twice, anyways. And there I was just checking to make sure that the ELR, I believe, wasn't going to be the case. Oh, and guess what? This this squad takes another sniper attack. I think it's been hit 3 times now. I kind of wish that I kind of wish I was keeping stats on that sort of thing, or like marking certain units for that stuff. But I mean, who knows if this idea ever takes off and it gets to be incredibly popular for whatever reason. I can't imagine specifically why, other than the fact that campaign games. Personally, I think campaign games in Advanced Squad Leader are always fantastic. But I definitely don't think I would be able to be the sole person tracking every single unit. After a while, it just gets kind of crazy to do so. So now it's sort of a question with the German side as to what do I actually want to attack at this point. Um, I'm kind of running out of options, and I'm getting really close to my stone location. I don't want to say limit, but my goal at this point, I'm getting really close to it. So it's becoming more of a conservation of force. Do I really want to risk throwing my one of my panzers into more combat, especially street combat, if they were to advance at all, versus the Russians, or do I want to just have them sit back, take a couple extra shots, hope that I don't break their gun like that other one, and then go about combat that way? This is probably a good example as to another bad move that I should not have made first. Like, that's a 6 firepower because of the long distance. It's down 2 because of non-assault movement and open ground. So it becomes a 7 on a 6, which is still dangerous. And thankfully for me, it didn't cause any sort of quote unquote problems, but yeah, risking a medium machine gun that way, probably not a good idea. The other issue too with even doing that is the fact that I don't I only have that squad with the MMG and the other full squad there. If anything were to get to recover or rally, then I've got a huge stack of units that are going to be in trouble real soon. And this was basically a move that I don't feel like the Russians or the Russian player has much that they can do at this point. I probably should have used subsequent first fire with the two squads that just shot, but it would have been halved again. I think it would have been a two firepower shot, and they would have had hedge or the wall, probably the hedge to act as TEM. It would have been down two anyways, but I don't think it would have been a good shot for the Russians. And yeah, with the medium machine gun there, I really don't want to risk more bad shots. Or at least I don't want to risk getting a sniper and then kind of ruining somewhere else on the Russian defensive side. Technically, I could have taken some extra shots with the with that 227, I think, or 226 squad with the leader. But honestly, when you have two firepower, even on a subsequent first fire, it gets really tough to even get something out of it. That unit getting the +3 bonus from the structure just makes it, makes retaliation tough. Had I had another, I think if the Russians had rallied a second squad there with that leader, I definitely think I would have been way more hesitant to actually do anything with the Germans. I would have probably just, gone into the house in B11 and just squatted there for the rest of the turn. I'd at least be able to put some, assault fire onto B12, hopefully do some damage, but otherwise just kind of park there. And this is also something that should be taken advantage of if possible. There's a lot you can do with moving tanks. And at this point, I should have probably advanced one more. I don't believe there would have been street fighting, and that one half squad with the leader is hard pressed to really do anything. Had I advanced the tank into B15, I think it is, had I moved into there, it would have probably been a much better choice. I think there's something about the movement factors I had, or movement points I had. Regardless, would have been a really good idea, because then I cut off A14, because the Russian units wouldn't have been able to route through there. And I'm kind of blanking on if that tank would have had line of sight to A13. I think they would have, which would have made it even tougher, because there's no real avenue of approach at that point. And again, my unfortunate lack of knowledge with regards to the ordnance attack, and then the coaxial and hull guns, means that I shouldn't actually be keeping that acquisition marker. Sorry, my brain's a little fried at the moment. This is the real advantage to vehicles. Being able to throw a vehicle around and potentially lock down units in interesting ways like this, because you're effectively killing an avenue of retreat. But also, if you get around certain locations, you're obviously putting that tank at risk, because of the fact that it's not always advantageous. Even though tanks do have a good amount of quote unquote power or sustainability or survivability versus plain infantry, it's not exactly something that you want to mess with all that much. And just, debris everywhere just makes it hard if I ever wanted to like move that tank out. But regardless, um, yeah. So there's another issue. Technically, that unit would have been the one broken unit would have gotten DM'd anyways. But regardless, we'll just say I forgot. But again, getting back to vehicles, it's just they're very powerful, and it takes a little. It takes, at least for me, it took a lot of different plays, different scenarios, and obviously losses attributed to that to get a feel for how I should be moving with tanks. I still don't think I've gotten a really good hang of it, but still, some hang of it is better than absolutely none. Well, it seems that the Russians aren't going to go down with the fight, and again, why you really need to be careful with where you're moving. Granted, at least it wasn't. At least that squad didn't break. I think if I had to redo this move again, I would have probably not thrown that unit there, regardless of what the eventual result for this attack will be. The fact that I didn't go for the anti-tank rifle, just for the sake of having it specifically under in my possession, I feel like that's a move I should have done instead. This might not turn out to be a really good move, but that's another thing to really keep in mind with tanks. Your units can use them as cover. It didn't work here, but it can still happen. I think that leader should be dropping the CX counter on it too, but I think I might have just forgotten that. But yeah, you can definitely use armored vehicles as cover. Technically, even trucks and wrecks of vehicles, but the main point is just that there's no reason you shouldn't use that to your advantage if you have the ability to do so. You might be wondering why I rolled there. The reason is that when you get to the heavier ordnance, there's some that cannot be moved by manpower, but specifically for the 81 millimeter mortar, you'll notice that underneath the MTR designation, On that counter, there is an M and 11. What that means is you have to roll below that number in order to actually be able to move that. Now, there is some extra stuff to it, so I'm just going to see if I can pull it up again, because it's a lot easier when the game explains it for me. So there's two kinds of reasons, or there's two purposes for that number. It's called the manhandling number. So the first is for towing. So obviously, it wasn't unheard of to have anti-tank guns or mortars or other pieces like artillery being towed by vehicles. This isn't the case here, but however, there is the secondary purpose for that number, which is the pushing number. So for to be able to push a either a gun or a mortar, etc., it has to be done by a good order crew. Obviously, if a bad order is something that's broken, so they can't move stuff anyways. But it's a effectively you roll underneath equal or underneath the manhandling number, and it's for each hex that you're trying to enter. So you have to keep rolling it the further you want to move, which makes sense. Some of those pieces could be very heavy and need to have quite a bit of force exerted upon them by their crews. It also causes double the normal movement factor costs. So pushing into debris is already a +1 to a 1, so you're doubling it to 4, so you can't really get too far with that. It's going to be really tough if I push it or try to get across that wall, because a wall is a modifier to that stuff. There's some DRMs to it, but the main gist, until I start moving more anyways, is that you basically always want to roll underneath that movement, that manhandling number, and there's some exceptions or some additional stuff with the bigger the guns get, and also just for failed attempts and so on. Advancing fire here should be fairly straightforward. I've shot with a lot of units. There's some that there's not really any shots for and didn't move. Especially, like, for example, I6, I really don't want to lose that position. So it's something that I'm going to be holding on to as much as possible. This was rather unfortunate. I don't think I shot with the MMG as well, and I probably should have, at least to hopefully get a positive result there. And this 548, it's a hard decision because there's already a broken squad, and I'm not too worried about them rallying the unit in B13 anyways. Even though they're with a leader, they're not super strong. However, the unit in B12 is just a single unit, and they're already broken, so it's going to be easier to eliminate that one at all said and done. And that's basically what I'm going to be going for. Again, it's a little tough just because of the fact that it's all stone structures here, so there's going to be quite a few modifiers that even on a 6 is a good roll. It's technically a below average, but sadly did not get me anything. Thankfully for the Germans, there's not too much that I need or want to route. in a way, I'm limited in my options. But it's also just there. There's a couple of broken units. I could have probably added a DM to have them run away, but I don't really see the purpose for that at the moment. Now, technically, I could have broken that 9-2 leader um, because of the way that you can do voluntary breaks, so that a unit like that would have been able to effectively like run away and drop the pin result. Because when a unit accompanies a broken unit, at least when it comes to a leader can voluntarily break, get rid of that pin, and get himself in a trench or a different location. It's probably something I should have done, but didn't think about it at the time. Would have probably been more useful to do that too, because even though it means I would have run the risk of having to rally that leader in another turn or in the next turn, at least I would have been able to get him and the unit he was with into the same hex as that 4 morale broken unit. And by extension, getting into what I can only imagine, I think it's K10. Yeah, K10 with that broken unit, and then being able to rally all 3 at the same time. Probably just would have been a better option. And yeah, like I typed out, voluntary routes is something that probably would have been very handy to do. Again, voluntary routes, basically a broken unit can decide to apply desperation morale on them even though they're already broken, and that gives them the ability to move away and get to a better location. The reason for the rules allowing you to do this, obviously, is because a broken unit can't move during the move phase. They don't have a move. So they can't get anywhere. So if you happen to have one stuck, well, quote unquote, stuck in a debris field for, say, 7 turns, if you break them, you can get them to a location that has that unit, that leader that you're looking for. And even if there's no leader, obviously the next benefit to it is the fact that by getting out of, say, a debris field in this case and into a building, you secure that -1 for any sort of rally attempts. Now, self rallies add a +1, but that's neither here nor there. You end up canceling that if you don't have a leader, and if you do have a leader, it's an additional bonus. So it's a win-win regardless. The only reason I'm doing some of these other moves too, these other advances, is specifically so I can force the Russian player to have to divide their firepower as much as possible. While I don't necessarily want to be attacked at double firepower by a 447 or a 447 with a 528, I believe, underneath it, if I can force the Russian to choose between attacking and moving, which is going to be crucial in the following turn, because I'm trying to desperately secure my stone locations. Which, speaking of, at this point I would have 2, 4 for the building in I6, 7, 8, 12 if you count the building in F5 and F6, 13 for the building in F8, 14, 15, 16 for that bunch. We can see that are all moved, and 15 for the guy in C13. So we're above what we need, but it's going to be tough to hold on to this unless the Germans get lucky. Anyways, as always, thanks for watching.